Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Yeah, I didn't mean to one-up your story about.
But I empathize.
Well, you know, one of the blocks to empathy is when you listen to someone and then you do one-upsmanship, right? That's seen as like a block to empathy. So,
In acting, they talk about that very much. There's a thing called status exercises.
uh-huh.
It's a guy called Keith Johnston, who's like a master improvisational actor. He wrote a book that talks about exactly that phenomenon where people are constantly trying to either raise or lower their status in sort of a dialogue situation, interaction situation. And for actors, it actually helps to sort of analyze that and saying, in this line I'm about to reenact, am I trying to raise my status? Am I trying to lower my status? What am I doing? Because that sort of plays into the intonation of how you talk and how the gestures goes. A lot of those things sort of play into how they sort of think about dialogues and kind of reading the script in between the lines, so to speak.
Uh-huh. So yeah, the acting is all about empathy. Yeah, it's like I've been talking with Ed Hook, who teaches acting. He has some acting classes that he teaches in Chicago, I think it is. And he had written some articles about empathy. So we were just having a chat about that. And he was actually interested in doing I was going to do an interview with him in a couple of weeks, and then he was going to lead a panel too. So
Sure.
I was kind of interested in that kind of empathy in the arts, and
Yep.
so looking forward to that. So as we're talking, I'm kind of switching the different windows. I'll upload this to YouTube so you can kind of get an idea of how it works.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be pretty cool to. It's almost like it'll be like the empathy show.
So you mean this particular one that we're recording now is part of the show, or oh really? I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm recording it, so I'm going to just use it as an example, as a test.
Sure.
You know, I don't think you'll have much of an audience, but it's still, yeah, I'm just kind of switching things around. I got to get kind of familiar with it because it's a lot to juggle. And when I do the panels, you know, I'll be having all this stuff going, and so I'm going to have to keep one eye on all the technology and someone to be a panel, you know, be a moderator to keep the dialogue and all that going. So that would be too much.
So that's what you meant by the monitor. I was looking at the curriculum thing.
Moderator, yeah, or facilitator.
Oh, there's a convener.
Uh-huh.
So did you want to talk about
the
conference thing? I briefly looked over it.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious to sort of get your inside thoughts on what it is that you're planning.
Yeah, it's kind of the basics is that it's like the overall conference is how to build a culture of empathy and compassion. So I'm starting to find people who will be panel members, and specifically to be moderators or facilitators. So you know, you and I had talked about that you would do one, and then you find 3 others who are kind of that you feel would be good for a dialogue. And then we set up this whole Skype video conferencing, and you know, I have all this software in the background for capturing the dialogue and the audio. And then we just posed the first question is how can we build a culture of empathy and compassion? So that'll be like the first kind of a baseline question for everyone. And then the next question can be, that's for the first hour. And then, you know, we'll kind of quit after an hour. And then I'll go through all the process of uploading the video. I have to get it all synced up and everything in Adobe Premiere, which is what I use for video editing. And then I'll upload it to YouTube, and we'll have, those panel discussions available on YouTube that anybody can watch. And then we can go into a second panel, the same group, or you can kind of shift things around. And then it would be the second question would either be, how can we nurture, foster, teach empathy in the education system? Or, a question that the group would like to kind of discuss. And I'm thinking of doing the overall conference on how to build a culture of empathy and compassion. And then there'll be like a sub-conference on how to teach or foster, nurture empathy within the education system. And so it'll be kind of like a conference within a conference, and I can kind of bring in educators around that. So that's kind of the basic framework, and it's an ongoing 1-year rolling conference that, we're going to do the first panel Monday with our empathy curriculum. Tuesday, next Tuesday, November 1st, with our empathy curriculum group. And then you and I had talked, a while back about you doing one. That could be the second one. And I'm starting to line people up. So there's, and it's learning by doing. It's this call right now is learning by doing. I got all kinds of windows and kind of work out. Like I'm already seeing that that some of the audio is a little too high. And so I'll need
always good to model it and then try to prototype it.
Yeah, so somehow I'm going to have to see about levels, for example, the kind of get audio levels going. So yeah, so anyway, that's kind of the gist of it. And I really enjoyed our last talk on we were talking, I think we talked for over an hour about the nature of empathy, and you're so enthusiastic, and it was a lot of fun.
So you said so each one is like an hour long or 2 hours long?
1 hour panel discussion.
So and starts off with the same. So each panel starts up with the same question, which is how do you foster a culture of empathy and compassion? And then there might be like a sub panel discussion on a separate topic. Is that right?
Yeah, that on a second hour.
Oh, right.
So there can be multiple. We can do your panel can have multiple calls. Multiple hours to explore different topics.
Yep.
So
what do you think is the best way for me to introduce the idea to the other? So I have Laurie and David that I've invited. I'm curious whether, if I ask them, hey, this is something that we're doing, and they say, oh, what is the expectation or something like that. Is there like a little blurb that I can send them, or should I simply say, well, we're going to talk about the question, which is how do you foster a culture of empathy and compassion for an hour, and then we'll sort of bounce around different ideas, or how should I frame it for them?
Yeah, I think that's basically it. It's right now, and I'm kind of hoping that the panelists will have some creativity around that. How to, as a facilitator, you've got a lot of leeway around that. You can point them to the website, and the website has a lot of the instructions and all that. So I can see one thing that we're going to have to do things like probably kind of deal with lighting and stuff, because like right now you're like glowing, like you're like a glowing. It's actually it's actually kind of artistic. So.
Well, yeah, I bet everybody's gonna be in like totally different lighting situations.
Yeah.
I'm not even looking at myself right now, so let's see what I look like. Oh, I see. Yeah, because like the monitor is right in front of me, and it's sort of like whitening my face, basically.
Yeah, it's like you're totally overexposed and washed out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, lighting's a whole nother issue.
Well, since we're like all over the place, that's one of the biggest challenges of like how do you make the physical space cohere to one another.
Yeah. So what do you think of the overall idea and concept? And
Well, I mean, the part that I'm starting to sort of understand is it's just a kind of a dialogue that happens between whoever the participants are, and there is a kind of overarching theme, which is how do you build a culture of empathy and compassion. But then individually, they can sort of answer that question in a variety of different ways, and then based on what one person says, another person says, and what the group says, it sort of can evolve and grow into different discussions based on what the makeup of the group is. That's sort of a casual kind of an impression I'm getting. I
yeah,
hope that's
that's
more or
it.
less accurate.
And it can even be somebody saying, I don't even believe in a culture of empathy. It's like it's just like wherever it wants to kind of go initially. One thing I had thought of was to have a shared Google Doc that it might not work for everyone, but I found it with some people you can have a shared Google Doc, and while someone is talking, people are taking notes, and then you kind of get this document take shape while people are talking. It might be too much, to handle at once, but with some of the groups, it's worked pretty well.
Okay. What do you? I mean, just taking notes, you mean, or?
Yeah, it's like taking notes, and if somebody's talking and you have ideas, you can start writing down the ideas that you have, and then
And you see them in real time. Everybody sees it in real time.
Yeah, the Google Docs is a real-time shared document. It's also how to get an outline of the talk together, because ideally there'd be also a full word-by-word transcript is kind of hard to do, but to have an outline, because I'm kind of imagining creating a web page or section for all these panels, so you'll be able to go and, maybe with a sidebar that you can kind of go down the panels and, have a nice interface, so you can, there might be like 100 panels in a year, whatever, or 50 maybe, I don't know how many.
Sure.
But, I could do 2 a day on some days, I think.
Yeah, I mean, somehow documenting, I think it would be extremely worthwhile. I don't know what exactly the right method is yet. I haven't used Google Docs as like a real-time editor. I've only used it as like one-person thing, so I don't know. But if you've used it and it works, then yeah, why not? Why not try it out? I'm also aware of something called Sub-Eta Edit. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
Which is what I have used in the past. Let's see. Sub-Eta is basically something that was intentionally made for exactly what you just talked about, which is real-time document editing. So what it does is I can tell you a quick, where is it? What I've used in the past is just generally writing. What happens is it not only lets multiple people edit a document at the same time, but also it records almost like a video or a sequence of keystrokes as it goes through. So you can actually play the whole thing after you're done and actually see it develop. So it's sort of like you start with an idea and you see the document grow into, incorporate a bunch of different kind of perspectives and how it changes and shapes itself. It's been a very interesting tool for me when I write, because I start with like a random idea and I start writing, but you always end up with something that's remarkably different from what you start off with. And just to sort of see how your perspective changes as you write, as you're empathizing with yourself, was another sort of interesting way of kind of witnessing that happen in front of your eyes, so to speak. That may be another interesting way to kind of document it too.
Yeah, you can then speed it all up, and the whole document takes shape in like about 2 minutes or something. That'd be kind of interesting. With Google Docs, I've been using it quite a while, so I have a lot more expertise in it. So, but yeah, it's something to keep in mind for. That's what I'd like to do. Is the beauty of this is that it can just be evolving.
Yes.
You know, I don't have to have this perfect conference all set up, you know, like, this 3-day, 4-day conference. It's that this thing is going to evolve. And when I was up in Seattle, I was talking with, you know, someone up there who's a facilitator in the compassionate listening process. And she started having all kinds of ideas about, well, you know, just people talking is boring. There needs to be some kind of real empathic listening going on in the panel itself.
Yes.
So that the panel models it instead of like a typical panel where everybody's kind of fighting for
Well, yeah.
you know.
The first thing that came to mind when you said that is this idea of, I mean, because I don't know if I told you the story of how in a class I had with a drama student and an art student, and I was an engineering computer science student. The only way that worked eventually, because it was a nightmare trying to get that to work in the beginning, the only way it eventually worked was when the art student started to draw what we were talking about. Because the moment we have something external to all three of us that we can point to and say, yes, that's what I mean, or no, that's not what I mean, it's very difficult because you're basically just either trying to defend yourself or making sure that your voice is heard. A lot of those kind of like sort of more sort of self-centered activities that are happening because you feel that you might be, you know, maybe you're being attacked or maybe you're frustrated or something like that. But the moment there's some way of externalizing it, it becomes much more fluid, I think, than just a whole discussion. So if there's, I mean, I don't know if I don't know if you know anybody who can visualize something like in real time instead of just writing it down. But that might be an interesting participant in every panel discussion. Is somebody who's, I mean, like if you look at some of the RSA animations, there's like a person who knows how to draw really well and kind of like, you know, note takes, but also visualize at the same time. That way, it's sort of like external. You can see it develop and go like, well, no, that's not exactly what I meant. Then I immediately see that you've misunderstood instead of me like having to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's like there's something, something about kind of getting it externalized. So you have a shared document, a shared vision that you can start seeing and turning around and adding and subtracting and reorganizing and reorganizing. So, but that's what I've found about the Google Docs has been really good. Is it's like a first step towards that. And like somebody's talking and I'm feeling like I've got something I want to say, and you know that feeling like, oh, I want to say something. I can just type it right in there. And it's like in the, you know, it's documented that even if we don't get it, it's part of the document. So you haven't like lost it. And then I don't feel all kind of constricted about, I'm not going to be heard on this because I know it's in the document. And then the other part is going in and organizing and reorganizing what others have said. You know, you see there's a structure and you say, oh, I think this is a better way of structuring it. So
you can actually move stuff around very easily.
You can move it around. You can create internal links as well. So you can create a table of contents, copy and paste. You can add images. You know, so you could insert an image.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's the only problem I've seen is that some people have trouble doing two, video and that at the same time. Maybe their screens are kind of small.
I mean, it's hard enough to really pay attention to the other person, let alone try to write and listen to that other person at the same time.
Yeah.
Because even in class situations, I stopped taking notes. I started to record lectures or videotape some of the classes, and then I refer back to them whenever I get whenever I want to sort of get a more concrete recall of what happened. But like note taking oftentimes seems to take me out of the loop for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on person to person. Some people seem to be able to multitask in different ways.
Yeah, I've got another. It's working out all the process for doing this, and one of them is sometimes we get feedback, audio feedback. So I bought a headset. So I was just going to plug that in and test that out. So this is the first time I've had a chance to really test it out. Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear anything. So, oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm not using the microphone from here, but oh, good. Yeah, it's sometimes I was gonna just recommend that people. Are you using earphones?
Yeah, I have earphones too.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that helps to keep from getting the audio feedback that sometimes happens.
Yep.
So okay. Let's see. We'll switch to another view here. Yeah. So any other ideas about these panels, Slim?
I mean, one of the things I'm really curious to see it. I've never seen I've never done a more than 2-person Skype online, so I'm very curious how this works compared to like a physical version where people are reading each other's in a sort of a more present tense kind of manner. So it's hard for me to sort of gauge what is going to happen and then sort of give feedback in that sense. Maybe like once I see one session happen and see a video of that, I would have a much better idea of what would be useful. Because the only things that I can think of are kind of common sense, like just how making sure that they are able to talk to one another without feeling like they have to interrupt somebody. I mean, like just general sort of common sense knowledge of how people have normal conversations, just being done online. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I've never even doing a one-on-one Skype session is very different for me, at least, from having a physical conversation. Like right now I see you, but then like it's sort of like from a specific angle, which is not an angle I typically see people at, just sort of like from the top down. I mean, that already creates a certain kind of dynamic for me. And the fact that I can't see the rest of your hand also has certain kind of like connotations about like certain times I can notice things about other people where I want to either that person wants to talk, so I sort of like kind of fade out. A lot of those things are not there. It's very difficult to read, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a feeling that the things that might be useful on an online version might be different, or maybe we just take it for granted in a physical conversation, and those are the ones that need to be augmented in figuring out how to do it. And once that is resolved, a lot of the other fancy things might not be as big of a deal. I don't know. That's sort of a guess I have, but I would really like to take a look at what a multiple people conversation online in a limited kind of camera view entails.
There's one example of a group Skype call that's on the page for the conference.
The image?
Oh yeah, it's like there's the image.
Is there also video? Or?
There is an actual video. And I'm not sure what the link is for that.
Okay.
Teaching empathy. Oh, it might be under, is it under planning? Oh yeah, it's under the heading there. It's conference, possible panels, planning. Is the
planning?
top part. Yeah, if you click the planning, then it says contents, and this is just the general kind of a developer page for the project.
Yep.
And then it says a sample Skype call. And
oh yeah, I
there's
see it.
a 1 hour recorded call.
Yep. I see it. So how did it go? I mean, maybe you can give me a general impression of that particular one that you did.
I liked it. I find the group calls pretty good. It was, I think it was like 6 of us, and it was starting to get a little bit big. I had the sense that people want to talk, so it's like 4 people, I think, is a good amount, and maybe 5. Kind of maximum is 5. It's just that everybody has a chance to talk and kind of be engaged.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess that would be an experiment too. Like, what's a good amount of people?
Absolutely. Because six, I mean, typically when six people, six, like for example, like when I have people over for dinner, to me, six is like the most that can possibly like eat and talk and on having one conversation at the same time. Beyond that, just seems like just almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And even six, sometimes it breaks up into two conversations. But depending on how you sort of facilitate it, generally can be it's manageable. But maybe online, it's even more difficult than physical versions of it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I personally find maybe I'm just not used to Skype's chats. Just there's something very much lacking to me in a Skype session, and I tend to talk. I don't know, like when I sort of become more self-aware, certain times I tend to talk more when I'm doing it over Skype than when I'm physically present.
Mm-hmm.
Like sort of like the listening meter goes down for me when I'm doing Skype, and maybe it's to do with like I'm trying to. There's a lot of sort of ambient subtleties I can capture in a physical conversation that's very difficult for me to capture in a sort of virtual one. So maybe some of those things are impaired for me, and I have to like pay extra attention to be able to do a better job. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, one thing I was thinking about is using reflective listening in terms that if somebody speaks about something that they're actually reflected, that you like, for example, you're just saying that when you're talking on Skype that you tend to talk more because perhaps you're not getting more clues that you
Mm-hmm.
would get in person.
Oh wait,
For
what?
so I'm
Okay.
just sampling, just an example uh, of the reflective listening.
Oh, you mean you just repeat what I said?
Yeah, is that
Okay.
that's the, are you familiar with reflective listening? Just the as part of like within the empathy world, there's this whole notion of reflective listening, of
Mm-hmm.
kind of reflecting back, or you summarize, or you
Sure.
rephrase what somebody has
Sure.
said, and that kind of like models. That's a bit of a modeling of the empathy. So doing that within a panel might be a way of kind of, yeah, I guess it's a matter of raising the empathic discussion level too, right? It's like we want to model what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's extra attention that has to be paid when you're having the conversation online as opposed to physical, just because you're lacking in a lot of this different things. So you add extra methods or something that sort of makes that more possible. But at the same time, what might be working against it is like number one, you have to get used to doing that, which is one hurdle. The other thing is does it stop the flow of the conversation if you do too much of that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, I mean, these are just sort of like things to keep in the back of your mind
Yeah. So
as you're doing it.
as I'm doing all this technology here, it does kind of inhibit the flow of the conversation a bit because I've got my awareness is on the different buttons that are going on here, as well as
Right.
if we have a shared Google Doc that people would be typing in, that might be a inhibit some kind of a natural flow.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these are just speculations. I mean, it's just the idea of because I mean, this is interesting in the sense that like um, the more the limitations of technology there is, the more aware you become of what it takes to actually have an empathic conversation, right?
Mm.
Because the limitations are the ones that are sort of making it more obvious that certain
Mm.
things are not working or something like that. So I think this is fascinating because of its limitations and being able to reflect on each session and saying, oh, interesting, what happened there is just as a case study in and of itself of how panel discussions work and how empathy gets sort of reenacted in that group dynamic. is already, I think, quite interesting as a sort of something to study with.
Yeah, it's kind of like within conflict. That conflict is a gift that you can learn from. So
Yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the idea that even in design, we always talk about constraint is the first thing you want to embrace, because without constraints, I mean, you're sort of lost. You don't know what to do, because I mean, you have a blank canvas. I mean, the most feared thing for any artist is just blank slate. Like there's nothing, absolutely nothing. The first thing an artist tries to do is, well, what's my medium? Okay, paint. Great. First constraint. That's all I'm going to use. Or what's my concept? Or there are a bunch of things that artists have figured out how to do. One of which is they have to figure out a way to put constraints into the situation so that they can actually function. Same thing seems to be true of dancers, where in dance we talk a lot about reciprocal relationships. When I push, if the other person doesn't push back, I fall.
Oh yeah.
The person has to push back, and when I push, so that the structure becomes a structure, and then the dance actually becomes a dance, as opposed to just a flop.
Yeah.
So all these things I think are fascinating, sort of foray into the act of empathy itself, and this very medium in which we're trying to do this becomes in and of itself a sort of an exercise, an experiment in empathy.
Yeah, so we can use all aspects of it, even the flops.
Yes.
Yes.
There is no such thing as flops.
There are no flops. Yeah.
There's experience.
There are opportunities for learning something else. So
yeah, you discover. Yeah.
And I think this will be in the future too. I think more and more of people's conversations will be like this, worldwide, because as the technology gets better, all the bandwidth gets better. I'm finding myself talking to people like on Skype all the time now. So it's maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's certainly something that wasn't possible before that's enabled now, which is fantastic. The question is, like, I mean, so it's sort of like a quintessential question that David Gersten also asked to the high school students. When you see somebody on Skype, did you see them? Now, like, the sort of goes into the question of like, what does it mean to see somebody? What does it mean to actually have a conversation? I mean, it's certainly true that even when you're physically present, it's completely possible that you don't listen to that person and you didn't really see that person. At the same time, on Skype, are you different or better, or how does it sort of actually make you ask those questions? To me, it's interesting when you say something like, in the future, more and more this would happen. I hope that's true, and like the technology itself has to change dramatically in my mind for that to really take shape, because like a lot of people might find less satisfaction online versus physical until they find either a way of heightening their own sort of methods of trying to empathize online, which is certainly a great thing to do, but it takes effort, right? And I don't know how many people are willing to put in that effort to do it. That's a general question. So until then, I have a feeling not like you and I are probably exceptions to the rule. I mean, there are a lot more people who will be like, you know what, I don't want to do this online. Why should I? I'm just going to meet my friend next door physically, have a cup of coffee, and do that. It's far more interesting to me, and they might do that, right?
Yeah.
So
in that group video, which I just pointed you to, one of the people afterwards, he sent an email to everyone and said, I'd rather get together with people in a coffee house than do this. He was like, yeah.
I mean, so I think the technology has a long way to go for it to really sort of reach a point where there's like a fine balance between general audience seeing the value in doing this over something else, and a lot of the early adopters like yourself and I are willing to put up with that because we see the potential. We're interested in the very subject of empathy itself, and this is actually, again, an experiment itself in empathy. Like, how does the medium affect the act of empathy? what am I lacking that's preventing me from using the medium so that I can be more empathic? But most people probably don't see the value in that, or not as patient, or something like that. So there's still a lot of stuff technology has to do. The question is, how quickly will that happen? Who is actually interested in making that happen? And I don't know how many people are actually interested in making that happen, because a lot of people, technology companies, are perfectly content with the fact that we got video conferencing. Like, oh, this is fine. Let's just mass produce this. And as long as everybody has access to this, the future of communication has already arrived, or something like that. When in fact, unless empathy happens, or if the medium somehow helps that more, it's nowhere near the potential of what it could be doing.
Yeah, I also see it as a lot of directions that this can go. For example, this program actually does streaming, so you can send it out to Ustream, and so it can be alive, and then there can be a feedback a feedback loop where people can post questions, and I'm also thinking in terms of doing some empathy groups where there are groups of 4 or 5 people that are just doing empathic listening for each other, and it's kind of a very supportive, sort of a type group. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I saw your brow furrow and your eyes get a little narrower, and I knew, oh, he doesn't quite get it. So I was reading. See, if I didn't have the visual, I wouldn't have been able to pick that cue up. That you didn't. That you possibly weren't aware of that. But these are just empathy groups, and where one person can talk about whatever is real or important to them, and then the group reflects. So I say, oh, I was at home and my mother, she never listens to me. So the group says, oh, so you're having trouble with your mother and you're not being able to connect, and then you just kind of keep going on, and that reflective listening, it can be very nurturing because nobody's trying to tell you what you should do. They're not judging you. They're not trying to fix you. All they're trying to do is be good mirrors to you, so you can hear yourself, be seen by them, and be reflected. And so anyway, I've started doing some of these groups, online like this. And then there's also kind of another thing that I was going to try. I was going to do like a program called Empathizing with Edwin. And I was kind of inspired. There's this video out there from the 60s of Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, and somebody else who were like top, therapists back in that day. And they all work separately at a different time on the same individual, Gloria. And so you can compare the 3 styles of their work with Gloria.
Do you have this video on your website as well?
I have a page where I'm starting to.
Oh, is this at Carl Rogers and Gloria Counseling?
Yeah. Okay. And there's and then if you see that, you'll see that there's other links to the other 2. But the idea is that in terms of empathic, there's people out there that just do empathic listening, that they can all try it out on me, right? So we'll do like a half-hour session of empathizing with Edwin, and then we'll have this whole directory of different approaches, and you can kind of do comparative comparing. Oh, this person uses this style, this person does it this way, and they're all doing empathy. And I'll just put my life.
Oh, so you say something, and the people are sort of listening to you and empathizing?
Yeah.
Is that? Oh, I see.
Because what I'm doing now is I'm doing a lot of interviews with people about asking them about empathy, and I'm wanting to actually have them do empathy. You talk to academics, they don't empathize with you. The academics, they just want to tell you how it is to a large extent, right? Their studies and all the stuff they found out. It's a very cerebral academic. And I'm all for that, but I also want to have the essence of empathy. The actually doing empathy, where you actually
The
feel
acting.
it, the act, yeah. So those are just kind of ideas that are kind of spinning, around.
Oh, so you're looking for ideas to sort of other kinds of things to do online
Yeah,
in a video format? Oh, I see. And I now understand what you're
yeah.
saying. Okay. Huh. Um,
Well, I was just sharing that was just some ideas that have come to me so far.
so one question that arises for me, like, so, because my main interest in empathy came through the channel of making, right? And to me, like the act of making is an empathic conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I'm curious is not necessarily therapy or therapeutic empathy, but the kind of empathy that results in a whole new perspective at the end of a session, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow changes your worldview, and that actually makes you um, understand what's the word? Understand yourself better.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, like if you extend the idea you just talked about, where empathizing with Edwin, and have it or integrate something into that format, such that they at the end of the day um, somehow express back a new idea based on the experience they just had with you,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of see how their worldview changes as a result of trying to empathize with somebody else. So it's not. Are you familiar with the Eliza, the program?
No.
So basically, it's a therapy. It's modeled after Carl Rogers, the way he talks. It's a software program, and what it did was it was sort of like the beginning of artificial intelligence, where a guy had made this software that mimics the way Carl Rogers talks
Oh,
in the
really?
counseling.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it proved to be an extremely therapeutic tool. People would just talk to this computer, and they would, pour their heart out, and they would feel really understood, and they would feel wonderful. But of course, it was just a robot that didn't actually empathize, right? So to me, like when I first during the course of my research, like a bit of a red flag went up for me. Like, so it's possible that one person sort of, has a certain way of conversing, talking, reflecting, without actually empathizing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, making is this line where, because the computer wasn't making anything. At the end of the day, the computer's perspective didn't change as a result of trying to empathize with this person, right? So for me, like, there's like a fine line between somebody going through the motions of empathizing with really engaging in an empathic, not just empathizing, but an empathic conversation, which, because the definition of conversation, the way I define it, by necessity, ends up with a new perspective on your world model too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if there's anything that can bring that element in, because it's not simply just making the other person feel a certain way, but something that changes in the person who empathizes as well.
Uh-huh. So you want some kind of a transformation to happen within both sides, the person that's heard and the person that's doing the hearing.
Yes, and because to me, if that doesn't happen, I'm not convinced that the other person really empathized with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Because how could you? I mean, like, at least in my sort of narrow-minded definition of and that's the reason why I use the word empathic conversation as opposed to empathizing, because a lot of times empathizing could simply end up with, oh, that person is crying, I cry, didn't I empathize? Period. Well, maybe not. Well, but maybe there's more to just simply crying because somebody else is crying. Because to me, at the end of the day, if I can't express something back as a result of my worldview having changed, there's something that comes out of that experience. I'm not fully convinced that the loop is complete.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's
Uh-huh.
sort of like a single-sided empathy,
Yeah.
which by definition isn't quite empathy.
Quite what you're
I don't know
looking
if I'm
for.
making any
Oh,
sense.
very much so. I did an interview with a guy named Dominic Barter who does this process, it's a restorative justice process. And I asked him about empathy, and he said empathy is when the blocks to action are removed. It's like action where the blocks to action are removed that don't exclude. So his situation is he's bringing people into a circle process, two people who are in conflict, and there's this dialogue process that happens, and they, at first nobody hears each other. They go through a process and they hear each other, and they start kind of getting each other, and then at some point they kind of take responsibility and some sort of a transformation happens, and out of that transformation they put together a action plan of what they're going to do next, and they actually have a very detailed plan that they're going to do, and it's with timelines and dates and the action. And I've seen that same process within mediation. So for him, empathy is that action, and you've probably seen it in a group. When a group gets together and they agree to do something, and they're kind of several steps into doing it, but something's not working, right? Somebody hasn't been heard. It's like somebody is kind of holding back. And under that, it would mean that something hasn't been totally empathized with and heard for that empathic action. And that's what, what I'm calling kind of the final stage of empathy of this process is empathic action. So it's somewhere, it seems to be somewhere along those lines that transformation has to happen, and then a new actions get born out of that new transformation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. So somehow integrating that aspect into the sort of video activity, and I'm still not sure exactly how to do it, but might be something worth considering.
Well, there is one part. Since there's multiple kind of parts to the process, and he actually told a story. He was actually doing workshops, and this woman came in, and she says, "I've been doing the dishes at home, and my boyfriend is just laying on the couch, and he's not doing the dishes, and I'm really pissed off." And then the whole group, everybody listened to her. They said, "Oh, you're not, he's, all her pain and suffering was kind of like being heard."
Sure.
And then she felt really good, and she went home. And then a week later, she came back, and she said, "I'm doing the dishes. My boyfriend's not doing them." What? He hasn't changed. And then it was the whole process. This is the story he's telling. The whole process happened again, and she went home, and he said, "I'm thinking, I don't know what's going to happen the next time she comes back." And sure enough, the third time it was the same story. So the process of being heard in and of itself is actually a very nurturing process. So it's like one part of the process, and it might be, but it's not. It might be enough for you to get calm enough and get enough centering to actually do something. But it's the actual doing it, the changing of the dynamics of her relationship with him, with her boyfriend, and that's what this restorative circle process is. It's like bring her and the boyfriend into a dialogue process and have something in the relationship change. So I think that's kind of like what you're talking about. It's also in the empathic working with the materials, right? You're having this dialogue and you're looking for some kind of a transformation to happen within as I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, like any kind of making, whether it's acting kind of making, like with another person, if it's dance, it's with your own body, if it's wood. I mean, there's always seems to be a transformation that results as part of that conversation, and it's at that point where you have either realizations or epiphanies that really change the way you look at the world. And to me, that's where the value of comes in, because it's not simply to be nice to other people. That to me isn't the goal. Being nice to other people almost becomes a side effect, in this in the sense that it really, what it does is it really helps you, like you as a person, really I don't think, have enough of an understanding of yourself. But the only way you can understand yourself is through another. And then you do that and you understand yourself. I mean, it's sort of like this weird, it's neither about being selfish nor about being altruistic. It's somewhere in between. And at the same time, it's as if being altruistic and selfish is one and the same thing. And so to me, like when somebody says, we should be nice to other people, that's an insufficient statement, because one could easily say, well, why should I be nice to you, right? And when somebody says, well, because it helps you understand yourself, I'm like, well, why should I understand myself? I mean, it's sort of like a conundrum, but then they become one and the same thing. To me, it makes a lot of sense to want to do that, from a selfish perspective, and also from a kind of a love situation where you really need that as an energy source for you to be able to sustain your life, kind of like what we talked about last time. Because to me, without empathy, the most important thing that doesn't happen is trust. And to me, trust is sort of like foundation to all of this. Like when that woman you talked about and that man who doesn't do the dishes, when they have an empathic conversation, even before the whole dish situation changes, when they understand each other, I'm guessing that the way they trust one another changes, and then because that trust changes, their action changes almost as a result. It's not like, oh, I'll change my action because I feel bad for you, or no, it's their relationship has changed because the nature of their trust has changed.
Yeah, the trust. To me, I have actually a story about that with the trust.
Oh, okay.
It was actually in a workshop with Dominic Barter, and within the workshop, I was getting heard a lot. Like it was a very intensive, talking and being heard, and just kind of a very rich kind of empathy kind of going on. And what I found is it kind of like grounded me and kind of deepened my trust in empathy in general. So with that, I went the next day to my freestyle dance that I do. And in the dance, I said, okay, I'm going to just try to empathize with everyone. And so I was doing kind of mirror dancing, like mirroring people. And I didn't say it verbally, but I said it kind of silently to myself, is I want to get who you are. I really want to feel who you are, your essence. And so I would mirror people's, motions and movement, body movements. And then it's like sometimes they would see that that's what I was doing, and they were moving really fast, and they would actually slow down so that I could kind of get them. And what happened is, at some point, we kind of clicked together, and it's like we kind of become in sync. It's almost like we become a third body in sync, and then it's like
you're resonating.
Yeah, you're totally resonating. Yeah, and that resonance is like really high, and you probably know that from acting or dance or all those. And then it's like the person offers an energy, a motion, and then it's like, oh, that's a fun one. Let me play with that. And then we'll try this. And it's like, oh, I like that. That's cool. And this stuff is happening. I mean, at super high speeds, and I already know where the person is going, And so it's like way beyond what you could cognitively, keep up with. It's like happening at this deep mirroring essence kind of, and it's so creative and it's just so enlivening and kind of enriching. So that's the one thing about the hearing, even if it doesn't happen in a transformation at the moment. Is that the hearing kind of gives a sense of trust that when you go out into the world, that you carry that energy with you, and it can be transformational in other situations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that situation, you can almost call the dance moves that came out, that was transformative in
Yeah.
the sense that you didn't know to produce that body movement until you tried what you just tried. I mean, that's basically how a lot of dancers seem to choreograph. They improvise and they just sort of have these ways of just flowing, and then they've got a music on, they're just flowing and they're just trying stuff out, and then from it, like, out comes a choreography that the choreographer didn't know,
Yeah.
he or she had it in them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Total.
that's again, like, yeah, making is I mean, sort of like that essence of sort of like empathic conversation that you have.
And that's really what you're focused on, is that conversation with the materials, is like, I'm here to relate.
Right, but
Mm.
again, material being just about anything. I mean, it could be another person or your own body or a piece of wood, or even computation. Like when you're programming, I mean, several times in the past, I know people. I mean, programmers who have the knowledge of the language um, that we have in human language. I mean, computer language is different, but a lot of sophisticated programmers have the capacity to engage in a conversation with the computer in just the same way they could engage in a conversation with human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're more introverts and they find that more comfortable. They understand how computer works in much more depth than how human beings work. So they actually have a heightened sense of trust in the computer, just because of their social awkwardness or whatever it may be. But nonetheless, it's still a form of trust that they have, and they have a deep bond with it. And they also engage in a flow in that same exact situation. It just so happens that they happen to be more comfortable with that medium than being with another human being.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've come to kind of the importance of trust, because I was thinking about the nature of trust, and it was something I thought in terms of how does it relate with empathy. And trust is the feeling to know that you will be empathized with by someone in the future. It's
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very big statement. If you break it down a little bit, I would almost say it's sort of like a two-step thing where, first of all, you trust that the expression that you make will be what's the right word? Understood by that other person. But that's the first part of it. But also, you also somehow predict the reaction that the other person will have on what they've empathized with. So it's sort of, because if you can't, like, for example, like if I just to sort of make a really weird example, if I'm trying to empathize with the ground, let's say the earth, and I say, I trust that the earth is gonna be there when I put my foot down, and it's gonna sort of like empathize with me. If I don't have that understanding of the earth being there, which is a reaction of me putting my foot down, the trust isn't complete either. It's just that, like, my moving of my feet would have a certain kind of feeling on the ground is insufficient. It has to reciprocate back by saying, just like you expected, I'm still here, as a structure holding you up. It has to complete that cycle.
well, that's interesting. I think the ground is saying back to you, "I'm still here." When you feel that pressure,
Yeah.
I'm still
I mean,
here. I'm still here. Yeah.
might be a funny example, but I tend
No,
to
that's
like this very
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That there's like
because one of the things that I keep coming back to, the trust. I mean, to me, is so important. Is like the kind of conversations I've had with other people about uncertainty and certainty, which to me also sort of relates back to empathy in the sense that you whether you empathize with something or not. So if you don't empathize, you think of something as complex. When you do empathize, you think of something as simple. So this is sort of like, I mean, in the past, I used to think like simple is sort of like an external thing. It's some things are simple and some things are complex. But no, I don't think so. If you don't empathize with something, the perception that you have is complex. But if the moment you empathize, it becomes as if it's simple, but it's the same thing. It's just that your ability to empathize has changed. It's not that the other person has changed, right? So if life, for example, if you consider it like a completely uncertain, risk-taking activity, if you sort of perceive it as such, it could be. But there are also moments of certainty And to me, that's like moments of empathy. Like you've empathized with certain aspects of the world, and you have a sense of trust built up because you've been able to empathize, and that begets certainty,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then it creates a kind of an oscillation between you start with uncertainty, and then you empathize, and you get certain certainty, and then you find other things that you're uncertain about, and then you empathize, and you get certain, and back and forth, and
Mm.
back and forth. So it's sort of like an oscillation that constantly happens. And to me, if you can do more of that, the kind like when you trust, and then you get reciprocal kind of response back, not merely confirmation, kind of in the sense of like the earth is still there when I put foot down, but there are also times I think when you talked about the idea of flow and other things, that's a slightly to me like a different kind of reciprocal relationship, which is that they act in trust back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not merely a confirmation of my expectation has been fulfilled, but there's more. Like they actually act differently based on the fact that you've empathized with them. And to me, like that's kind of like an energy, like almost like I would almost sort of categorize that as a kind of like a sense of being loved, or
Mm-hmm.
feeling like what you do matters to other
Mm.
people, sense of belonging, a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
things. You give trust and you get trust back. It almost seems like that's the sort of the core of kind of like what we talked about last time, where I said without empathy you would commit suicide, because you can't trust, and if you can't trust, you will never feel the kind of love or the kind of energy necessary to want to sustain your life.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause, like, what else is there? Like if you don't feel loved, if you don't feel connected, you're like, I'm not sure why I'm still here. It's painful. So probably tomorrow is going to be another set of day of pain, and the day after that. So I probably a more logical solution to this is to take my own life. Whereas if you get a sense of love based on trust, you're like, oh wow, this feels really good. How maybe tomorrow I'll have another dose of this, and the following day, and so on and so forth. It seems to sustain life in that fashion, which to me is, I mean, like one of the most magical things that I would have ever thought of, like what empathy could possibly do to somebody's life,
Mm-hmm.
more than like being some of the more superficial aspects of like being nice to other people, but like it sort of like as a sort of a source of energy for people to want to sustain life
Mm.
as you're doing it, since you know how love feels, and you know what it takes to give and take love. You sort of do that, and it all sort of as a side effect brings about concepts like compassion, as you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It, to me, is like kind of like a beautiful loop that happens, which I don't know of any other way to describe without using empathy as like the glue between the two ends of, uncertainty and certainty, and trust and love, which sort of emerges as a side effect.
Yeah, it's like you haven't heard of people kind of committing suicide because they had too much empathy and love. So it's true. So,
But yeah, and I don't know. It's always. I mean, because since I've had personal experience with a friend of mine who kind of went that route, that sort of to me is like is a kind of one of the most one of the strongest entry points into why I think empathy is
mm-hmm.
important. Um, and I hope other people resonate with that idea
Mm-hmm.
too. But I think there's something very, I don't know, very visceral and very universal in that I think is worth spreading, I guess, so
Uh-huh.
to
It's
speak.
like empathy as a force for life, for continuing life and living basic. Uh-huh. Well, that's why I talk about culture of empathy. Because it's like, how do we really nurture that quality at a culture-wide, in a culture-wide
So,
way? And it is kind of odd that the culture would set itself up with so much loneliness and alienation and pain when it seems like it really doesn't have to be that way. That it's
no.
kind of sad. I mean, it kind of makes me really makes me
Well,
almost
so,
tearful to
so
think about it, you
well,
know?
but I mean, but at the same time, there are people like yourself who's trying to empathize with the very situation that we're in. Why is the world this way? Why has it become this way? And precisely because there are people like you who are doing it, change happens, right? I mean, and not to sort of like say it as like, oh, it's just the way it is, we should just give up. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, because that idea of empathy and the sort of phenomena of empathy exists, people like you are sort of, I think, changing the way we think about it and how we become more aware and more conscious of these things. Because it might as well be in the past that the society, the way they were made up was just so different from the way it's made up now that people weren't aware of that, or not conscious of that being important, or whatever it may be. It almost seems like as time changes, we could become aware of more and more nuances of things. And it took a certain kind of society, the kind of society that lacks empathy, for us to recognize the importance of empathy. Why is the world the way it is? And
when it's kind
questions
of
like that.
ubiquitous, you wouldn't think about it, but when you start losing it, then it starts being a reminder
Yes.
of hey, we better take a look at this thing. This thing is missing. So, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
we could go on, I think, kind of for hours, kind of exploring the nature of empathy, and I enjoy it, and I think it's you really have a lot of perspectives that I hadn't thought of. So I really enjoy that that part of it, because you've really given this a lot of thought and explored it in a lot of different angles, and would maybe even do an interview sometime about your book too, because
Sure.
you have that book. And
oh, I posted the full version online if you want to check it.
yeah, I saw that, and I think I uploaded it to the magazine too, and I'll send it out to the larger group. So it's kind of I think our next step is putting together a panel. How does that seem? Are you do you want to moderate and then find
Sure.
people who you think would be good for doing the panel? And
yeah, I mean, I'll get back in touch with the two people that I talked about last time. I don't know if you want to have another person you said as a fourth.
a fourth, if you had a fourth person, I think if you think just three is okay, I think that would. I mean, with
okay.
me as the fourth in that sense of convener.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I'll see if there's anybody else that I can think of. Otherwise, yeah, three would, or four of us would probably suffice.
I saw you had done a bunch of interviews with people around on empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to get in touch with them to see what all their time schedules are like. Maybe I'll start with that, because I haven't gotten in touch with other people I've interviewed. I only thought about the two people I'm most familiar with. Other people were sort of experts that I'm not as close.
Yeah, might be hard to invite them. They might not quite take it.
But that doesn't hurt to ask to see what they say about it.
Yeah, it's kind of a new way of doing a conference. They might be interested. I'm finding some people are just interested because of the novelty, of it. Yeah. So, I mean, I interviewed Simon Baron Cohen, who did the book on evil in empathy, and
Cool.
Christian Kiesler, and it was just a Google Doc discussion. Sure. It was just typed out, so they were just willing to try it out. So they might be interested in that.
Yeah, because I can definitely send an email to the psychologist that I interviewed while I was in school, because he would be a wonderful person if he has the time.
So in terms of a format, it's also good to think in terms of what is, in an hour discussion. I'd initially thought of like an hour and then some extra time if we have a Google Doc to spend the time cleaning up the Google Doc. And then also to have a period to discuss how was for any kind of feedback for how the process worked. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, so my quick reaction to that is, I mean, if we can figure out a way to document the Google Doc thing while we're having the conversation, so we don't have to do like a major 1 hour cleanup at the end of the session, probably the better it is. Yeah. My guess. Because I mean, typically, at that point, like an extra hour of just trying to clean up a Google Doc.
Oh, I said half an hour, but.
Or yeah. But somehow figure out a way that because because it's one thing to treat the Google Doc as kind of like a chore that has to be done after the panel, and it's quite another to keep it an evolving document that everybody sees as they're having the conversation. In my mind, the evolving version is not only more useful in the context of the conversation because everybody sees it and it sort of grounds them in what the active discussion is, but it also makes it more economic in terms of time, being spent more on the discussion and less on the documentation. And the other question I have is, because it's a Skype thing, I'm guessing there's no like Q&A or anything like that.
No, it's
because like other perspectives on what the people have talked about typically are some of the most fascinating things that the participants themselves forgot to mention or simply kind of eluded them because of the way the conversation flowed. But the people who actually almost bring it back to real world or sort of ground it back to reality and kind of focus it, at least to me, has always been the people who ask the questions, who've been listening to the whole discussion and have had these burning questions that sort of hone some of the points or drive it home. I don't know what the best way to sort of get that is.
I think the first ones would be just a straight panel discussion. And as I mentioned, that this program actually has an output to Ustream or any other streaming video. So that can be like an addition, is to get that feedback loop. But I'd like to kind of just start it as simple as possible until it all becomes kind of automatic, because right now I'm still juggling a lot until it's kind of like really internalize the process, but definitely that's something I'd like to, incorporate.
Yeah, because I think if it becomes like a video and it goes up online and other people ask questions, even at that point, that's still, I mean, I think the feedback we get on the session itself, becoming a sort of source of input for the panel people in the panel to respond to, I think is another way of completing the loop. Because it's one thing, it's relatively difficult for the people in the panel discussions to constantly have the big picture of everything that we've discussed. So the Google Doc is sort of an attempt to help with that endeavor. But I think a person sort of with a different perspective asking a question, making that umbrella sort of question, I think is also another addition that we can do after we put the video up online.
So as a moderator, you've got a lot of leeway just for working all that out. And
sure. Well, I mean, this is the first time for me. I'm sort of like just thinking it through, but it's sort of like in real time, like everything goes out the window, and you're just trying to like keep up with what's going on. So.
Well, I should wind it down. I think we've been at it for almost an hour and a half.
Sure.
And I'll actually put this video online, and I think it'll be kind of fun.
Sure.
And that's where the one thing, I mean, I can say I'm starting up again, is the putting the video online. It's nice to have like an outline of what we talked about, but to go through and listen to it a second time is like, oh my God, it's so much work, So it makes it much more accessible to someone,
Yeah, I think that's why having a dedicated person who really focuses on the documentation aspect, so that we don't have to do a sort of like a whole another iteration on re-listening to the conversation and kind of organizing, would to me would be worth a kind of a method, so to speak.
So find someone who's willing to sit there and listen to the discussion, and just it's a fast typist that can.
Well, I mean, not just a fast typist, but I mean, if you look at some of the, I mean, not that this is the exact way we should do it, but if you look at the RSA animation, like a person who draws things out, to me, that person isn't just listening. To me, that person is trying to comprehend what big picture is, right? So it's yes, they're listening because they need to listen to understand, but they're also at the same time synthesizing
Yeah.
all the things that are being spoken, and then you end up with a documentation that is, that person's best attempt at comprehending the big picture, and then that may or may not be, correct or whatever it may be, but it is certainly a useful way of having a documentation to have, in addition to the actual content of the video being produced, because anybody can listen to the conversation themselves and make their own judgment on what the overall thing is. But then, without the diagram or whatever the person draws, like you said, it's difficult to sort of kind of summarize or outline or kind of like have these different ways of entering the piece.
Yeah, so they're kind of adding their own interpretation, their own summarization, and their own worldview kind of into that. And so that's a big contribution to the whole dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I can always send out a request for someone like that.
Yeah, if there's anybody in the circle that has that kind of capacity, I think that would be fantastic to have as a person in a panel, because that person isn't just a sort of a passive listener.
Okay, well, those are all great steps. I think I'm starting to feel a little tired here.
Sorry about that.
No, it's in a good way. I enjoy this. I really learn a lot just by dialogue like this. So I guess it would be just waiting to hear from you when you feel that you've got the panel together, and if you have any questions along the way.
I'll go ahead and send out an email to the psychologist, and I'll also send out another email to the two, trying to figure out what time works for them. In terms of time, what time works for you is probably another thing I need to know.
It was, I put together a page somewhere available. Under planning, under that link planning, it says available panel dates and times. So I'm starting to create a spreadsheet of like times when we can meet.
Okay. Okay.
And I'll be kind of refining that, but that's like a kind of initial.
Yep. No, that looks good. So like 10 a.m., 1 p.m., or 4 p.m. kind of time range.
Yeah, I think during the day would be better too, because it looks like it's night there where you're at.
Yes.
And so the lighting, I think, will help too with during the day.
Yep.
So there's all those kind of things to work out, but might not matter.
Yeah, I'll send this very page out to the people to sort of like pitch in on what time works for them, and hopefully get a sort of a single point where we all can do it. And if that extra psychologist can't make it, the three of us, the three people, and including you, 4 people could probably do it at a time that works for us too.
At least to get started, we'll see how it works with different numbers.
Yep.
Okay, then I'll let you know when this is online. You can kind of get a sense of how it looks. And
sure. Will do. All righty.
Okay, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edwin. Slim. It was a real pleasure.
I'll send an email.
Okay. Okay,
Bye-bye.
Signing off. Bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.